of, by, and for the people, and I'm making sure we're live. Yes, we are. I'm going to go ahead and unmute him and bring him up first. My good buddy, my rugby buddy, my life buddy. What's up, Eric Buchanan? How you doing, man?
Hey, Clint, how are you?
I am good. You can still hear me? Everything good on your end?
Everything's great here. And let me just say one thing. 2020 may suck in a lot of ways, but this weather has been awesome. These are great
weather.
Fall days. And we had a beautiful spring, too, if you'll remember. When everybody was stuck inside, it was like the best springtime weather ever.
Yeah, I think God may be shining on us a little bit and giving us a little bit of, you know what? You go out for your walks, walk the dog, open the windows. We all need a little bit of that. I'm going to unmute this other person, bring up my other guest, my other buddy into the show. What's up, Clay Dennis?
Hey, how are y'all?
Good. All right, guys. We're posted. I made sure we're live. It looks like everything's going as it should. And just so everybody understands, we've done this show. We had 5 conversations with our mutual friend, John Ballinger. John had to step out because he is sometimes he gets stuck into, courts and legal stuff.
Life gets busy sometimes.
Yes, it does. But Clay and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and I know Clay's going to be stepping in. And there's another guy that's going to be coming in with us every now and then too. I hope I can convince Brandon Lewis to come on every now and then because he's got a pretty different, pretty interesting perspective. So Eric, the election day is over. The election is not over. We'll get into a little bit of that hopefully in the course of this conversation. But I thought me and you talked, this weekend and last week. The Electoral College, it's in place for a reason. One of the things that frustrates me a little bit is I don't mind you saying stuff if you kind of know why something's in place. But when you don't know why it's in place and you're saying we should get rid of something, it frustrates me. It's and me and you've talked about it before. When you're walking through the woods and you find a fence and you just cut the fence, you don't know why the fence was there in the first place. Find out what it's keeping in or keeping out before you start cutting fences. So I thought a conversation based around that with you two guys would be good. Now, with all that being said, but let's get this out of the way. Do you have a personal opinion about how it's going so far, sir?
You want to go first? I'll give a short answer, Clint. I think the answer is that America is going to be better off if we allow court cases and challenges and questions to be answered. And even if at the end of the next few weeks till early December, when the Electoral College votes are cast, we end up having Biden is confirmed as being president because of the way the counts are finally done. I think that's a better chance of healing the nation by doing a more thorough examination of what happened in these states that were too close to call, or that there were some issues potentially with some of the ballots. If Biden's elected at the end of the day through what appears to be a reasonably fair election, that there wasn't any massive fraud or stuff that happened, then he's going to be our president. And as Americans, we should support our president. Don't have to agree with him, don't have to vote for him next time, but he's going to be our president. But I think there are a whole lot of people that have a whole lot of questions, and I think there's some reasonable questions out there. And the way that gets handled in our system is the states have to actually confirm who their electors are going to be, and that hasn't happened yet. And then there may be to some extent, some courts getting involved to decide whether those electors are being picked properly in accordance with the law. And I think there's some very legitimate questions just about the process. One big one being that we as a country had a whole lot of different states change the way that the election occurred this year, different from most years. In some ways, it was laws that were passed to make it better for people to vote by mail. Some places it was done contrary to state law or in a way that wasn't completely consistent with state law, but was done pursuant to an emergency order. And I think those all raise fair questions about the way that we're going to count the votes. And when you totally change significant procedures in the elections, then we should, as the American people, I think, at least have a chance to examine it and make sure that it was done properly. So if you want my real short answer, Clint, is I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. I'm not sure that there's a path for anything to happen other than Biden being elected. Maybe there's a path for Trump to get some stuff changed because the Electoral College still hasn't met. But I don't like the way our media is handling it and not actually allowing us to ask questions and get good answers so that we have everyone in agreement. And I'll say one thing I said to you off air, Clint. which is the way we're setting it up now. If it stays the same, almost half the people who voted are going to have serious questions, are going to doubt the legitimacy of this election. If it's overturned, then I think there's going to be about the same number of people on the other side that are then going to be really, really mad and say that their election was stolen from them. And what I'm really worried about is our media, their lack of professional responsibility, their lack of fairness and objectivity is setting up a situation where half the electorate is going to be questioning the legitimacy of this outcome if we don't start having an open mind really soon and let some answers come out, let these questions be answered.
I think it's been media malpractice myself, saying the election's over when they know there's a process. I think it started months ago when we started. I would see people compare absentee ballots to mail-in ballots. It's not the same thing. One has a system, one doesn't. And with that being said, Eric, that's the longest short answer I've ever heard you give. Clay, what is your take on everything so far, sir?
Well, actually, I think the problem may actually be deeper than a lot of us wanting it to be. Why is it going to be so easy for us to believe that the election was stolen? And I think for me personally is lack of faith in government. Over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, what's the average congressional trust factor that people have? 8%, 7%, 9%. So why is it so easy for someone like me to say, I just don't think this was fair? Why can't we have something deep rooted that says, you know what, I believe in my system, I believe in our leaders, and while I don't like the outcome, it's hard for me to believe that there's fraud. Well, that's not the case. I have absolutely zero trust, none, potentially negative, in most of and I use quotation marks when I say leaders, most of those people couldn't lead their way out of a paper bag. And when I see, and I say that Republicans too, where are all of the swamp Republicans that are supposed to be standing up for the president saying, hey, wait, there's a problem here. I think Trump was on the verge, has been on the verge of going after the elite or aristocracy that is our government. And I don't think the Republicans really want him there anyway. They hooked their little red wagon to him while he was popular. So for us to sit back and say, well, wait a minute, maybe there is fraud, I just don't believe there wasn't.
Well, and one of the things I'll say, and then we'll jump into the meat of the conversation, is when the media tells us things that we see are not true, when we can clearly Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever you want to do, when we can research it and find out what the media is telling us, that's not the process. Oh, those aren't the statistics. Well, that doesn't seem to make sense. And then if you say something about it, you are labeled. And I'm not going to give a specific label, but you're just stuck in these big baskets of people that nobody wants to be a conspiracy theorist. Nobody wants to be unpatriotic. Nobody wants to be called a racist. Nobody wants to be called these things. But if you don't say what everybody wants you to say, then all of a sudden we can't talk. We got a label. I think it's a dangerous place to get to. And I will say this. I agree with you, Clay. I think the trust in our government is at an all-time low. I think the trust in our media is at an all-time low, and I think they've both earned it. And I think that if they want to get our trust back, that's one thing. I don't really know if they want to. I don't think they're invested. I think they've picked their side, and that's the thing that hurts me is I don't think there should be a side. I mean, and maybe I had this, very, rose-colored glasses looking back on stuff when I was younger. It just didn't seem to be this much angst, and 20, 30, 40 years ago. But it seemed that we could talk to each other about hard topics with much more respect. Now, with that being said, I know there was duels in the 1800s and people were, killing each other, and I get it. Politics has always been kind of a dirty, down low, ugly business. But Eric, I want to start it off with you because I'm going to eventually get to a point where I'm reading some comments off a Facebook post. I'm not going to put names to it. People can go to my page and read the comments because I want to talk about there are people out there that want to get rid of the Electoral College. There's people that want to change, revamp the system. They want to go simple majority. I don't think people understand the chaos that ensues in a country if it's a majority rule. But do you want to tell us a little bit about why it's important to have what we have? Just quickly, and then me, you, and Clay will start talking.
I don't know if it'll be quick. I will try my best. Let's hit some short, quick answers first. One is philosophically, what's the difference between a democracy and a republic? One of the big concerns historically, and I'm talking about going back to 2,500 years ago in Athens and Sparta and those kind of places, is democracies are dangerous. That what happens in a democracy is if the majority of people want to go one way, the minority have no rights. And to put it very simply, a democracy in the American South in the 1940s effectively took away the rights of black people because a whole lot of white people were the majority. That's what a democracy really looks like, or can when it gets out of hand. That the majority gets to say, here's the rules, and minority, you just suck it up and live with it. And one of the things our founding fathers recognized is we don't want to have a democracy. We want to have rights, and the rights are based in the Constitution, but the rights are also based in our form of government to limit the government. And what Clay said a minute ago is extremely important, that people don't trust the government. The government should not necessarily be where they put their trust. And in fact, some people today, I might even go beyond trust and say that that's where they get their faith, that they really, really rely on the government to make them feel like the world's going to be a better place because the right people are doing the right kind of things in the government. All those kind of disagreements about how government should run is built into the idea of you cannot have a simple majority make all the rules, because then you can do bad stuff to the minorities. And whether the minorities is white Christian men in the South now, or in the old days, whether it was blacks or Jews or whatever, that when you allow the democracy to run amok, the minorities can lose their rights. And that's one of the things we've always protected against. Now, what the founding fathers also recognized is that each of the original colonies were separate and they became separate states. And part of the way we divided up the power was not only are there three branches at the federal level, the judiciary, the courts, the Senate and House of Representatives making up the Congress, and then the executive branch, the president. Those three co-equal branches no one part of that has all the power. We also have a separate version of the separation of powers where each state has things that it has more control over, like, for example, divorce laws or tort laws, which is like personal injury if lawyers are suing because somebody got hurt in a car wreck or something like that. Lots of areas that the federal government's not supposed to have any say in are supposed to be controlled by the state. So one of the things that the federal government set up, what the founders, the writers of the Constitution, was that the president is not going to be elected by a simple majority of the people. That would allow the highly populous states, which back then was New York and Virginia, now it's New York and California, to decide effectively who's the president is going to be if you just did it by a simple majority, or it would allow the more populous regions of the country to have control. The idea of having a bunch of different separate states that all have an interest is represented in the Senate, where each state gets two, whether it's Wyoming or Alaska on one hand, or New York or California or Texas on the other hand. Each gets two representatives. So each state has a voice at the table. And so part of the answer to that is the Electoral College also ensures that the smaller states and the people in those states are going to have a voice at the table. Couple basic things. Let's be clear what the Electoral College actually is. It's a number of votes for each state based on what? How many representatives each state has plus the number of senators. So I think, Arizona has 11, Pennsylvania has 20. Pennsylvania has 18 representatives based on their population plus 2 senators. Wyoming only gets 3, but they only have 1 representative. So they're actually 1/20th the size of Pennsylvania, but they actually get 3 compared to Pennsylvania's 20. So it gives some measure of dividing up the power in the United States across the states. It protects everybody from being dominated by a simple majority as part of the way the founding fathers set up the Constitution, set up the way America would work. Let me give one kind of simple number, Clint. This is something you and I looked up ahead of time, but I think this really puts it in perspective. The vote this time, at least right now, based on the numbers that we know, was about 75.5 million for Joe Biden and about 71 million for Trump so far, approximately, rough numbers, about 4,500,000 apart. In the state of California, 9.3 million people voted for Joe Biden. What was it? 4.8 voted for Donald Trump. What's the difference in those two?
4.5.
Right at 4.5 million. If you take California out of the equation, the United States is exactly evenly divided in the popular vote. If we allowed the popular vote to just control, what would happen? California would pick our president every time. It's that simple. Let me add one more point. Changing this is not going to be easy. If those people that want to get rid of the Electoral College, it would require a constitutional amendment.
Well, and that should actually, real quick, that should actually give us a little bit of pause to think, okay, no one's going to get elected and 30 days later, this system's not going to be abolished. That's not how this works.
Constitutional amendments are very difficult. It requires 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, and then it has to be passed by 3/4 of the states. It just doesn't happen every day. Or a constitutional convention has to be called, which so far we've avoided for 233 years.
Good or bad? I don't know. I mean, is it time?
It's not time for a constitutional convention. America's too divided. I don't like changing the Constitution because most of the things we've changed the Constitution to do in the last 150 years, we did a right thing getting rid of slavery. We did the right thing getting people the right to vote. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were really, really good. After that, we can have we could do a long talk on each one of the ones after that, Clint, in future episodes and talk about how that has changed the character of America. Although, except the other one I think that everyone can agree on is giving women the right to vote that came along later on. But the direct election of senators, the income tax, prohibition, there's a lot of stuff in there that we can go and unpack later on that we can save for a different day.
Clay, I saw you mute yourself. I'm like, did I mute him or did you mute yourself? Can you hear us? We can't hear you. Hey, if you can't fix it, click back in and we'll try it again. So
it's a conspiracy. Somebody else did that.
Yeah, I think he's actually messaging me right now. It's a conspiracy theory right now. Let's do this. Clay, if you can hear us, click out. Can you hear us, Clay?
Smile, Clay, if you can hear us.
Oh, he clicked out. He clicked back in. All right, so we'll lose Clay. He'll click back in. So, Eric, I thought, with that being said, I want to start reading some questions if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
And when Clay gets back, I'll ask him if he's seen the same thing that I saw. Well, and there's Clay coming back. Ladies and gentlemen. Hey, Clay, can you hear me? Can you hear us?
Still not there, Clay?
No, I don't think he's there right now. Try it again, man. I don't know why we can't hear you. We could hear you fine before we came on. I'm going to hide you down. All right. Can you hear us, Clay?
When we hear him talking, we'll have to let him back in.
Yeah. All right. So here's my question. Let's go through this. Clay, we're going to keep talking. If you want to work on it, that's great. So I just had here's a couple of comments, and I'll combine these together. One says, ditch it. My question on my Facebook page was, do you favor keeping the Electoral College or changing it or simple majority elections? I was surprised. Of the 76 comments, I think it's 13 or 14 of them said either ditch it, change it, or tweak it. And right off the bat, the ditching and the changing kind of surprised me a little bit. So you alluded to it earlier, Eric, as far as the chaos. I want you to go. Let's dive into that. I don't think people understand how close we are to, if we're a simple majority, it's not just the laws that can be put in place. I don't think people should own that much property. And if we're a simple majority, we can vote to come take that property, right? I mean, that affects not just presidential elections. If you start going down the road of simple majority.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that have been, let's put it this way. Can we agree that the idea of getting rid of the Electoral College and going to simple majority is something that has been proposed more often for people on the progressive side over the last few years? That seems to be more of a platform of people in the Democrat Party and not in the Republican Party. We've heard famous Democrats talk about getting rid of the Electoral College. Let's think of what are some of the things where our current system of government has protected the rights of people who are traditionally progressive Democrats. So, for example, How did we in America end up with gay marriage being legalized? Was it passed by a majority vote? Did the majority of people in the United States vote for that? No, it was the result of the Republican form of government, of elected officials being elected through the Electoral College into the White House, and the the Senate being elected from each state, and ultimately the president appointed the Supreme Court justices that were confirmed by the Senate, and the right to gay marriage in the United States came from the Supreme Court. A similar thing could be said about the right to have an abortion. Roe versus Wade was how the United States ultimately told states that they could not entirely ban abortion. You could go through a long laundry list of things where the minority has been protected through a Republican form of government. The danger is that if you allow the majority to always make the rules, how much worse of a country would the United States have been over the years? The racism in periods in our past, that would have been more institutionalized.
And the changes, real quick, and if that's the case, the changes when people get in power would have been vast, would have been way different, would have been much worse. I mean, if we have absolute control because we own the majority, then there's nothing there to stop us. So there's nothing to check how deviant we can make things.
That's a really great point. The more you have limited government, limits on government power, and things that make us more of a republic than democracy, one way of telling it to our scientific friends, it dampens the sine curve. It stops the up and downs from happening so fast. If we don't get way left and then way right, then way left. We have some of those problems today, but because of the way our institutions are built with divided power and representative government instead of democratic government, there's fewer changes that can happen all at once, and it creates a more stable society.
That's it. It's the consistency part of it too, because what we don't have also at that same time is we don't have the consistent side of things. In other words, if there's these wild pendulum swings, your party's in charge at 51%. Well, maybe that's for 2 years, maybe it's for 4 years, but there's no consistency on what rules we're following. And now you don't really have a country. You just have these wild extremes.
And you end up with crazy things like, okay, now that my party's in charge, we're going to make it only mail-in balloting.
That's
so
right.
that my side has a much better chance of staying in power. Or wait a minute, no. We finally got back to my side's in charge, and we're going to make it. You have to have voter ID, and you have to be there in person. And not only do you have to be there in person with voter ID, but you also have to pass a written test to answer questions like how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap.
Right.
Do you know where that question, by the way, you know where that question comes from?
Uh-uh.
That was one of the old ways they stopped African Americans from voting in the South, is they had a test that was basically those kind of questions. That's what happens when you give too much power to one side, is they can stop the other side from voting. I think we can all agree it was absolutely horrible racism in our country's past when they often in some states, kept African Americans from voting. But that's what happens when you let the majority have too much power and they can stop the minorities.
Yeah.
And what I think we have a problem in our society with people saying, well, I'm so sure I'm right that when my side has a majority, we should be able to fix all the problems, and the other side, we don't care, without realizing, without being afraid of what happens when the other side's in power. What are they going to do to you? How bad can they be?
Well, then we're playing the it's our turn politics, and that's where that's truly college football. That's truly how we get into, I don't care if Alabama's cheating because it's my team, everybody cheats. And when it's your team, I get all pissed off. We get into truly it's team versus team. I see Clay trying to jump back on. Clay, can you hear us at all? Yeah, hold on. Let me jump you back in here. All right, so talk, Clay.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Hey, Clay, how are you?
There we go.
There we go. All right.
How much of that could you hear? Did you miss any of that?
Yeah, I lost 2 or 3 minutes of it, then I just had to reset.
That's okay. So we were talking about, and we'll move on to the next question off the Facebook post, but Eric and I were discussing the dangers of the simple majority, Clay. It's like if we're going to operate a country based off every vote will count and it's going to count as a majority, then the pendulum swing of consistency of laws and what we can do will be so vast from 2 years to 4 years. There's no consistency. You can't run a country based off majority. It's chaos. Would you say the same thing, or do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the part of the problem is, the media and a lot of the swamp uh, folks want to say that Trump is divisive. This country's been divided long before Trump. I mean, put it this way: if we weren't divided before Trump even ran, he never would have ran.
Right.
If Biden and Obama and Hillary had united the country the way they swear they think they can, she would have won 50 states. So the problem is the people that are there now have no interest. I mean, how does, like, Joe Biden gets up there and he says, "I want to be the president for everybody." The man stood on national television and said, "Damn right, we're coming for your guns." I'm like, you can't say that and want to be president to everybody. If you go and you live in New York, you can't understand how people who live on $40,000 to $50,000 a year in the South, how we value hunting, how we look at guns, how we look at heritage. That's what makes this country so great is the melting pot. We used to use the term melting pot of different heritage and different cultures and different histories. And now you're either going to live the way New Yorkers live and Californians live, and that's just the way it is. We don't want guns. You can't have guns. We want to have. Go ahead.
I was just saying we've lost our ability to temper our life story, understanding that there's other people that can live the American experience differently than us, and that's okay. It doesn't mean one's more valid, but when it comes to the vote process, what you're both saying, and as far as the colleges in places, that's supposed to even out those votes. So whether I live in a sparsely populated state or a suburb, an urban, then it doesn't matter. Our vote kind of counts about the same. And if you do go to the simple majority, it's chaos only. And let me read this comment off my Facebook post. Eric and Clay, what do you think about this? I think Nebraska and Maine have the right idea. Split up the electors, make each congressional district count for one, and the winner of the state gets the other two. This is all or nothing. It's all or nothing as we have now. The format on a nationwide scale would have changed the results of the 2000 election, and then they keep going. But I don't know anything about that system Nebraska and Maine used. Eric, are you up to? Do you know that?
Yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. And I wish I'd thought to do the numbers on this sooner because it may actually be an interesting thought experiment. Maybe let's remember to do this next time. So here's the basic rule. Remember earlier we said, how does Electoral College work? You get the same number of votes you have for each representative. So Pennsylvania has 18 representatives, and then you get 2 for your senators. So Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes. Wyoming's population is so small, they only have 1 representative in the House of Representatives. He goes to Congress and doesn't have anybody else from his state to talk to. He's sitting there all by himself. But over in the Senate side, there's 2 guys from Wyoming. There's 2 senators from Wyoming. Wyoming gets 2 the same way Hawaii gets 2, the same way California only gets 2. So Wyoming gets 3 electoral votes. So the way Nebraska and Maine do it, Maine, I think, has 4 electoral votes, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe it's 5. But they have 2 for their senators, and then they have 2 or 3 congressional districts. Let's say it's 3. They have 3 congressional districts plus 2 senators, 5 electoral votes. But Maine decided, and they're allowed to do this under the Constitution because each state's allowed to decide how their electors are appointed. They have 5. They could say that we only send all 5 to vote for the same person. They could say we do it by popular vote and split it up. Or they could do what they actually say now, which is each congressional district gets to have 1 elector, and it might be 2 blue and 1 red, plus our 2 senator representatives, the ones with electors who represent the senators, could be whatever the majority is in Maine. So you might conceivably have 2 for Biden by the House regions, and then the majority of the state goes to Biden, so he gets 4, but Trump still gets 1 because that was the one region. Or I think what happened this time.
It's like partial credit.
It's partial credit, but you still have to do something with the 2 from the Senate. So Wyoming, for example, would almost always be the same because there's only 1 congressional district. But if let's go back to Pennsylvania, if Pennsylvania had 8 Republicans and 10 Democrats, they would also have to give the 2 probably to the Democrats because they would have won more votes. But what you have coming out of Pennsylvania is 12-8 instead of all 20. So here's the interesting question. I wish I'd had this question ahead of time. I would have run the numbers. Right now, the number of states that have more representatives that are red than blue is a lot. But the total number of representatives is more blue because the big states have more blue.
Right.
So California would have gotten fewer, and some other states would have actually had red votes. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if we could do the simple math and say the House of Representatives is going to be, I don't know what it's going to be, 225 to 207 or something like that. That's an 8-vote difference, and then the Senate's going to be 25-25. Biden probably would have won using that kind of math if every state did it that way, and it would have been a little bit cleaner. But the times when the House is a little bit more Republican, I think ultimately it would be a close call either way. You just don't weigh it so much in terms of the states. You weigh it more in terms of the congressional districts.
Representatives and the districts.
Yeah.
Listen to this, and then you both can weigh in. The problem is, and this is again off my Facebook post, which they gave some great questions. The problem is that the Electoral College does not function the way it was designed. The idea of awarding all of a state's electors to the winner of that state's popular vote didn't come along until decades later. Even now, a state could conceivably change the behavior of the electors. In fact, several states have signed into a compact to award electors to the winner of the popular vote. Currently, 2 states separate by congressional districts. Eric, you and I talked briefly about that, and Clay, I don't really know if I want a state to go to the popular vote. Do you explain what that would look like, Eric? And maybe you and Clay can talk about it for a second.
Yeah,
I got to step off. I'll be right back.
I'll explain how it works real quick, and then Clay can comment on it. So, Clay, what's going on? States like Colorado and several other states have passed a law that says we will appoint our electors according to the popular vote. So the people of Colorado basically get no vote anymore, except to the extent that they're voting toward the popular vote. And
they voted to give that away.
And their legislator did. Yeah. So but what they're ultimately saying though, is that doesn't go into effect until enough states have passed that law that the electors represented by that states is more than 270. Now, once enough states have passed that law, then effectively we've gotten rid of the Electoral College and we go to the popular vote. And that's mostly blue states have done that. It's not anywhere near there yet because I think a lot of the close call states, there's enough people saying, whoa, I don't want my vote in Tennessee to only count if it's toward the majority. I want Tennessee to be important, or I want what are some of the close call states? Arizona now, Nevada now. Do you really want, even though you're probably going to be blue this time, do you want to assume the national majority is always going to be your team?
No. I mean, there's more to it than just my vote. And maybe that's the point that I feel like I haven't communicated very well in other discussions is it's not about my vote and your vote. It's about the different heritage and the histories of the United States. California has an Indian population, okay? But they don't really think when they make decisions about how to govern, they're not thinking about the Oklahoman Indians, and they're not talking about the ones in Lumberton, North Carolina, and they're not looking at the different heritages or the Irish here or the Catholics here that's what's made the country work for so long. And what we're doing is we're narrowing it down to basically who can have the most kids and who can get the most, if I can entice people to move into my state, I get more votes, I get more power. And that's where the problem lies. And it's not so much that Tennessee won't have as much of an input to the election. I mean, it's vitally important to us, but moving forward, our way of life is not valued by the people in the areas that have more say in the election. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm overthinking it, but to me, I think it's deeper. And how does someone like Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, I mean, I guess you just stay in office long enough, but Nancy Pelosi seems to have almost as much power as the president of the United States right now. And she's elected in an area, 6 square miles of the United States? No one outside of those of those areas or boundaries in her congressional district has a say-so in it.
Yeah, I mean, but to be fair, she's elected by the other Democrats who came from the other 230 or 240 districts who then voted for her to be the leader. But I think one important lesson is, but what happens when the shoe is on the other foot?
Right.
You know, should the people in Upper East Manhattan be happy if Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton were to make all the rules about urban planning?
Right. That's right. I mean, I see both sides, and I while I don't particularly care, I lost all respect for Chuck Schumer when he came out against Kavanaugh with pre-printed signs 3.5 minutes after his name was listed that evening. You remember that? You know, it came out that it was going to be Judge Kavanaugh. In 3.5 minutes, Schumer was on the steps of the Supreme Court with no Kavanaugh signs. Well, how long were those made? That means he had to have them made for each of the people that Trump had nominated. That's when I knew that it was always going to be about, it had nothing to do with the rest of America. You know, give Americans a chance to decide what do we think about this? You know, they're telling us who is going to be on the Supreme Court, who is going to have this power, who's going to have that power, and they won't vote. They want to vote on limiting the times of the Supreme Court, but they won't vote for limiting the amount of time they can sit in the House of Representatives. It doesn't make any sense to me. Well, and more importantly, why it's worked for 200 and some odd years? Why do we have to change the rules every 2 years?
And that's part of the point of not having a democracy and having those institutions that make us more of a republic is it dampens the change. It makes it for a more stable country, but we can still make important change. We can fix problems over time. We can make sure that the law applies more evenly to everybody. Another example of, well, you know, I want the pure democratic view because my side will do better. Let me go back to the idea that we talked about how homosexual gay marriage got approved in the United States. California has some very democratic procedures. They have the propositions, like Prop 13 when I was a kid and lived out there was a proposition that would say that your property taxes could never go up. So old people would not have to lose their homes as they grew into more valuable neighborhoods and property taxes went way up. So they locked in, I think maybe once you turned 65, your property taxes were locked in. That was Prop 13. Well, they had a similar proposition to approve gay marriage or not approve gay marriage. And what happened in California? They actually had a popular vote in California that turned down gay marriage. California does not have gay marriage today because California voted for gay marriage. The democratic process in California would ban gay marriage. Where did the gay marriage right come from in California? The same place it came from in Tennessee. The U.S. Supreme Court deciding that it was in the Constitution, that it was a protected right. That's a democratic process. It protects people on both sides. Now, we can have a debate whether we can agree with that, but don't tell me you want to have a democratic process to protect people's rights, because that's exactly the opposite of what democracy does.
The two things that I wrote down while y'all were talking, because I stepped off for a minute, but I was listening to a little bit of it, was it's hard for me to hear people talk about let's do away with the Electoral College. And then I want to read a couple more comments before we have to run. When you also, at the same time, I want to protect state rights. Because in my world, if you're going to go a popularity contest, you're basically just taking your hand and wiping it across any of the states' rights you have as far as how you vote, in my opinion. Second thing is a majority rule for everybody that posts, every vote should count. A popular vote only does not mean every vote should count. That's not really what that means. If you look at the reasoning that we talked about before this, when it represents it, and when we talk about the areas and the cities that are represented or misrepresented, if you go to a popular vote only. So when you say that you want every vote to count, you have to, in my opinion, I think eventually more and more rights should get sent back to the state anyway, because California wants to run itself way different than Tennessee does. And it frustrates me to no end when I hear people say that I just want to win the popular. I just want to do the popular vote because that means there's no difference. One other comment I read, I didn't understand it, but it was saying that I don't even want to read that one. Let me move back to that one. This is a good one. I don't think the college is the issue, but more the fraud. And Clay, that goes to your point. It's more of the fraud behind the Electoral College. Let's see. Majority Electoral College serves to give more weight to the votes of those in sparsely populated areas. Why should their vote? Now, this one frustrates me. Listen to this one. Why should their vote count more than ours? So what they're saying is, why should the vote of someone that lives in a sparsely populated area count more than somebody lives in an urban area? I don't see it that way. Do you see as a vote in the urban area counting less than the rural area?
So one tell in there is he said, or she said, why should it vote more than ours? Meaning they're filtering this through what they think might be best for them, which is a little bit frustrating. Let me give a real quick statistic. If you go into some of the websites right now as they're doing the final count, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, not even going to Wisconsin or Michigan, but of those 5 states that either haven't been called yet or that people are still disputing, the total votes in those 5 states, the difference for Biden right now is 97,000 to 85,000. He's about 12,000 ahead if you add up all 5 states that are still either being counted or disputed. That's how close it is. That's the kind of numbers we're talking about. It doesn't take a whole lot of illegally cast ballots, however you want to call them, to bring that into play. And so part of the issue with the Electoral College is it also puts it on the states, and this is good and bad. It puts it on the states to figure out how is this state going to do it, and what are the election reforms or protections are going to be put in place. And I'll tell you guys, I'm so impressed with Florida. They were a mess in the year 2000. They came out on election night with close to 100%. And one of the things they did was some major reform to make sure that the votes were going to be counted quickly and accurately. And they darn well did that. Meanwhile, Georgia quit counting at 10:30 that night. Nevada took like Wednesday and Thursday off. What the hell was that about?
Okay, real quick. I hate to interrupt, but I want to ask you, because I know we've talked about the Electoral College, but I want to get your opinion on a couple of things, Eric, and you touched on it from both of you. One, have either of you, because I'm just not that well versed in the politics, going back and looking at the detail stuff, have either one of y'all ever heard of polls or states just going, we're going to stop counting now? Well, we'll count in a couple of days. I've never heard of that. Eric, Clay, have either one of y'all ever heard of that?
The stopping the count, to me, is one of the things that has created some suspicion. There may be legitimate answers, but where are the mainstream media reporters asking the questions of the election officials in Wisconsin and Nevada and Arizona and North Carolina and Georgia and a few other states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, whatever I didn't mention? Where are the regular, old-fashioned media personalities, the average people, go into those places and ask the questions? We understand that there was this thing that some people are saying looked irregular. 100,000 votes being cast in Wisconsin for Biden versus 0 for Trump.
When it 100, almost 200.
Whatever it was, yeah, right? So, and then the curve just looks mathematically like, how do you explain that? Or Nevada just stopping for 2 days, or Arizona still not having a complete count a week later. Where are the people just simply asking the questions for us as the American people and saying, what's going on?
That goes back to Clay, the mistrust.
But if there are reasonable answers, then we should be hearing about that. But instead of having a reasonable conversation about, here was the accusation, here's why it's not true. Okay, now we've got an answer. Do we believe it or not? We can have a further conversation. But instead we're told, shut up, don't ask questions. The media has already called the election. Dewey defeats Truman.
Right. Well, the same thing happens. I don't think everybody knew that it was November 3rd, that the vote was going to happen on November 3rd. It's like going into Best Buy on December 23rd and pissed off that the TV and the VCR isn't that you wanted there, or it's not VCRs anymore, but DVDs or whatever aren't there. I'm like, well, you knew Christmas was coming all year. Don't get pissed off at me 2 days before.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing with this. When they say, well, we didn't have the staff. Well, did you know there was an election coming up? It's insane. You can't say.
Well, and you've had the mail-in ballots. You've had the mail-in ballots sitting there. You at 12:01 the night on the 3rd, you could start counting them right then. You knew there was going to be expectations.
There's no way other than intentionality. That's the only, to me, knowing there was something intentional involved here. Well, and if it was one state, maybe 2 on opposite ends of the country, but when you're talking about 5 or 6 states, we went to bed one night with the election was in the bag. and you wake up 8 hours later, and all of a sudden, come on, something's just not right.
Well,
it's come on, man.
Come on, man.
And I will say this, and here's what people will say, and then I've got one more question to ask you both about the election. Trump that night was saying two things: keep counting the ballots in Nevada and Arizona, stop counting the ballots over here. The reason he was saying stop counting the ballots, because I've seen that. No one should say stop counting the ballots. He was saying stop counting the ballots till we get people in there to watch. And so when people use that, I'm like, again, you're pulling something. And I'm the biggest Trump complainer. I hammer Trump on his tweets. And if there are 1,000 things I've complained about Trump. So if anybody wants to go down that road with me, we'll have a talk about it. Because I'm not by book. He's not a hero. Our politicians are not supposed to be superheroes. They're supposed to be employees of ours. And we've somehow flipped the script and always look at them as royalty. But also pulling stuff out of context that him or Joe Biden say is disingenuous. And when people say, he said stop counting the vote, he meant stop counting until we get people in there and look at it, and stop counting the ones that are magically appearing just out of nowhere. Let's slow it down and see who you're counting and what you're counting. The last question I have for both of you is the mail-in ballots versus the absentee. Is that, Eric, in your brain, because we rushed this thing through, did it even, as an attorney, did it even go through a process? I know it went to the courts and they said we could do it, but as an attorney, doesn't it violate a little bit of due process? Or did it happen the right way? Maybe they got implemented the right way. Did it bug you?
Well, so there were previous to the pandemic some places that did mass mail-in ballots. California did it in 2018, and I've heard from friends that lived out there, and the result was it flipped Orange County, which is a traditionally Republican stronghold. Now all of a sudden that's blue, just like the rest of coastal California. Does that mean that the mail-in ballots were done intentionally to get more Democratic voters, or did it open up it more for fraud? I don't know. These are all good questions that I think people should be asking. As much as the Republicans are on the side of every vote should count, but you should have an ID to keep it fair, to make sure the vote is not diluted. The Democrats will make the argument everybody should have the opportunity to vote, and make sure that as many people as possible get offered a ballot. I think at the end of the day, here's the real problem. We are instituting, for the sake of this pandemic, some new procedures. More states tried to jump in to the mass mail-in balloting, and just to be clear, that means you were sent a ballot whether you asked to vote for by mail or not. It led to some problems. We've heard stories. And this again, it's on the media to investigate this stuff, and I'd like to hear answers to this. But of people showing up to vote and being told you can't vote, you've already voted. Well, I never got a ballot. I never saw a ballot. I wanted to vote in person. Somebody already voted your ballot, ma'am. Go home. Your vote doesn't count today. Somebody already voted for you. How often did that happen? That's something we need to know as an American people. There's just so much going on that raises legitimate questions. I have some real concerns, not necessarily being suspicious. I'd like to think that there were enough people voting on one side that at the end of the day, we're going to have somewhat approaching an honest election once we've really dug into it. But I'm worried that we're not going to dig in enough to find out. And to some extent, then that brings up Clay's making an absolutely fair point. Then if you're not going to look into it, and there's all these accusations and allegations and questions, then as an attorney, I'm going to say, once you get to a certain point, there's a lot of presumptions out there that I'm going to start presuming there was fraud if you're not going to answer the damn questions.
Right.
Well, Clay, don't you think we are supposed to be suspicious? I'm not saying with malintent. I'm not saying we're trying to catch them, but we are supposed to be a little suspect of our government. When we give somebody power over us, I think it's just common sense to say, okay, here's the power. Now we're going to watch you and we're going to suspect things from you. It's not, I don't think it makes us anything bad that we're looking at the election and asking questions, right?
No, I think we're just looking for fairness. At the end of the day, we know we don't always get our way. And when I was 18 or 19 or 20 back, 1990 or so.
Did they have horse and buggy back then?
they did. Yeah, we had the horse and buggy stickers. It wasn't bumper stickers.
It looks like the Amish with the Trump flags. You had your Grant flag and your Hayes flag flying from your.
We just made our own flags in the backyard. You you saw your politicians and you saw your House leaders and you saw your presidents. They get on to each other, but they had dinner together and they worked together. And I understood that Newt had a lot to change with that. I think when everybody would stay in Washington D.C., they were socially together. They would figure out a way to work together. Now they go home every weekend and they just don't have those relationships. But you want to question some of that. But when you see such totally polarizing people that like we mentioned the Pennsylvania Attorney General, an Attorney General of the entire population of Pennsylvania cannot say that one candidate isn't going to win
a week prior.
Period. You can't say that. I mean, even if you believe that, you can't do that. You represent the entire state. And so when you see that and listen, Ted Cruz is just as guilty and Marco Rubio is just, a lot of these people out there are so polarizing that it's 100% their way. The average American wants to give up still a little bit if they get a little. I know I can't get it all my way. Work with me here. Right now, everybody's going to get it their way, and that's the only way. I mean, think about the people that live in an apartment, an 800 square foot apartment in a place in Los Angeles or New York City, talking about climate change and how we're supposed to protect the environment. I'm like, you know what? Drive down to Tennessee for a couple of weeks. We got a pretty nice environment down here, but you see what I'm saying? So, but you can't do that. Everybody has one single point of view. And that's right now the people in power, and they have no interest in anybody outside of their point of view, which goes back to the problem with losing the melting pot idea in the elections.
I think you can hold it to two things. One, and I've said it with both of you on separate podcasts, and then we'll wrap this conversation up, and I'll give you both the floor. But I think we've lost the ability to hold our own. We're great at holding the other party accountable. We're great at that. We have lost the grip on holding our own parties accountable. The Democrats have done things over the last 4 years that I've not seen a huge swell up of Democrats stand up going, hey guys, we shouldn't talk that way about people, and we shouldn't be saying those things. And there's this due process. I see a lot of the same things even from Republicans sometimes. And it frustrates me because then it truly is team politics. The last thing that I think we have lost the ability to do is honestly apply some common sense, saying, of course we should be able to question things. Of course. That's how you learn. That's how you figure out how do you know where the system's broke unless you have people digging in it going, hey, why are the votes like that? Why are we doing this? When someone says majority rule and you don't question and push why, and they don't have an opportunity to learn, then all of a sudden, if you can't question things, then now you've hit your ceiling and there's no more country. Now it's teams. And that's called not good. I'm not even going to say the words on it because I don't believe that's where it's going. But I can tell you this, if I believe certain things and you're going to label me, then that's not healthy. And I don't want to label you. So I don't think they're going to they're going to let Donald Trump back in. I would like to think that it's going to be a fair election, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. And it worries me a little bit. Eric, it seems that you may have more faith than I do in the process ahead. Do you have some faith that, and if Biden is a legitimate winner, he'll be my president? I agree with you, Eric, 100%. I'm not going to be that guy. Do you have faith in where it's headed? And then we'll wrap it up. I give you the floor for a few minutes, sir.
So first point, as an American patriot, attorney, former naval officer, Eagle Scout, my dad was a Marine. My grandfather was a sailor. I've just got that whole history. My father-in-law was a POW in World War II. Just that whole history of loving America. I want to believe that we're ultimately going to get enough answers that the American people can believe in our electoral system. We should have the right to ask questions. We should have the right to get to the truth. We should have the right to know what happens. But we should also come together behind someone who fairly wins the election. And we also, I think, as a nation, have clearly seen, no matter how this comes out, that we are damn right down the middle divided. The Senate's going to be 50-50 to 52-48, somewhere in there. The House of Representatives closed the margin. The difference between the popular vote is the difference in California, and otherwise the rest of the United States is 50-50. We are damn well right down the middle, and we need to learn how to get along. And having said that, Clint, now I'm going to throw in my commercial. I am the Tennessee co-coordinator for a group called Braver Angels, and our
What?
organization.
I've never heard you talk about that on every podcast.
Braver Angels, I think it's .org. I don't have it open in front of me, but if you just Google Braver Angels, it's a national organization that's about 4 years old, and the idea is to push patriotic empathy for people who are blue and red and people that are purple to get together, be able to talk about issues and learn to get to know each other and to understand the other side's point of view, and to remember at the end of the day we are all American. Whether or not we agree on every political policy, we still should remember that we are all Americans. And this country has had a history where there are times when we didn't all act like Americans. We need to make sure that we do the best we can. And I think that's going to have to come from the people, because I don't think it's coming so well from our leaders right now.
Clay, you want to, and by the way, I put in Braver Angels link into the comments, braverangels.org. Clay, what do you think is going to happen, and how do you think what your guts say about all this happening?
Well, politics has gotten to where it's all encompassing. It used to be that politics was something we can talk about at the dinner table. You know, there's 3 or 4 things we disagree with, but at the end of the day, you know, we all do care about the environment. We all do care about, you know, people around us. We do care about the charities. We do care about the community and society, and we all sort of agree to that. And then we have these few political points where we don't quite line up, but that's really maybe 15% of our conversation or 12% of our conversation, whatever it may be. And now it's, you're a liberal, I don't want nothing to do with you. You're a conservative, you're a Trump, oh, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute, where did that come from? And so that's a real problem right now. And the only way that happens, there's the average American just didn't care enough about it. So we've been pushed into that by leaders and by the press. And you put people on TV that calls, let's just say President Trump and his supporters. I mean, who was it the other day on The View that basically called 70 million people racist and bigots? And that's okay. How do you call 70 million people racist and bigots? I mean, that's just insane to me. And keep your job.
Well, that kind of person would be awful surprised when they stop and look behind them and see the racist and bigots in their team politics and be like, wait a minute, we've got them too. Yeah, because it's a sin of the heart. It's not a sin of a party.
Well, it's the same thing. If there's 70 million racists on one side, does that mean there's 75 million communist, lefty, anti-American on the other side? No, there's moderate people on both sides. It's just
we put people in positions, you know, that are potentially good looking, or maybe they have a particular talent, but they're not that smart, and they have no interest.
You quit talking about me. You stop that, Clay.
Clint, you got ahead of me
with everybody else because they live inside their celebrity bubble. You know, I mean, 3/4 of the American public today, they can tell you what the bra size of Kardashian may be, but couldn't tell you what Auschwitz was. You know, and at what point did we allow that, and then B, are we okay with that? It's
all right. We got to wrap it up. I got another video to do. I will say this. I will throw this out there. This little nugget to stir up the water. Here goes the rock in the pond. I don't think everybody should vote, because I don't think every vote is equal. But there are some people that if you're not going to read about things and be kind of know what your vote, the consequences, I don't think you should vote. I think they're, you know,
I think everybody should vote, but you should have this whole idea that people can't get an ID is crazy. I need an ID to fly on a plane. I need an ID to drive. I need an ID to drive to buy a beer or a pack of cigarettes. You should have to present a physical ID in order to vote one way or the other.
Well, and I'll say this: there's been times in the history of my voting record that if there was a test put in place, I probably would have been one of those people turned away at the voting booth. Like, dude, you didn't answer enough questions. Go back to playing basketball, whatever stupid things you're doing. All right,
Clint, can we do a future episode where you explain how to be a success based on your good looks
and being stupid? Yes, I've proven it leads to mediocrity, my friends. Hey, thank you two guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody. See y'all next time.